The day my husband brought another woman into our home, he smiled as if he had already won. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look ashamed. He didn't even pretend to care what I was feeling. He simply unlocked the front door, stepped inside with a young blonde woman wrapped around his arm, and looked at me as though I were a stranger standing in his way. "Pack your things," he said calmly. "This house isn't yours anymore." For a moment, I honestly believed I had misheard him. 29 years of marriage, 2 children, a lifetime of sacrifices, reduced to a single sentence. The woman beside him laughed softly. She couldn't have been older than 30. Elegant white dress, perfect makeup, a designer handbag hanging from her shoulder. She glanced around my living room like a real estate agent inspecting a property she had already purchased. "So this is the place," she whispered. "I expected it to be bigger." Then she walked past me without asking permission. She sat on my favorite cream-colored sofa, crossed one leg over the other, and picked up the silver-framed photograph from our 25th wedding anniversary. She looked at it for barely 2 seconds before placing it face down on the coffee table. "I'll redecorate everything," she said. "The furniture feels old," Richard chuckled. "I told you she'd love this place." She smiled at him. Then she looked directly at me. "You can start packing now. I'd like the master bedroom before dinner." My husband nodded as if she had made the most reasonable request in the world. He didn't correct her. He didn't apologize. He simply folded his arms and waited for me to react. I looked at both of them. Then I looked around the house. The polished hardwood floors, the grand staircase, the stone fireplace I had spent months designing, the oversized windows that overlooked the lake. Every inch of this house carried a memory. Not because Richard had built it, because I had. Neither of them understood that yet. They believed I was the woman being thrown out. They had no idea I was standing inside a home that legally belonged to me. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I'm 58 years old. And if you've ever spent decades loving someone who only loved what you could give them, then you already know how this story begins. But I promise you, you won't guess how it ends. When I met Richard, I was 28 years old and already running my late father's construction company. Most people expected me to sell it. Back then, women leading large construction firms were rare. Investors questioned me. Contractors ignored me. Clients asked to speak to the man in charge. There wasn't one. There was only me. My father had spent 35 years building Brooks Development into one of the most respected residential construction companies in our county. The week before he passed away, he held my hand in his hospital room. "Eleanor, if people underestimate you, don't stop them. They'll never see you coming." At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. Years later, those words would save my life. Richard entered my world 6 months after the funeral. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't powerful. He was charming. He sold commercial insurance and somehow had the ability to make everyone around him feel important. He remembered birthdays. He remembered names. He listened. Or at least, he appeared to. Our first date lasted nearly 5 hours. We sat in a small Italian restaurant long after it had closed. The owner eventually turned off half the lights just so we'd realize it was time to leave. Richard walked me to my car. "You know," he smiled, "I've never met a woman like you." I laughed. "You don't know me. I know enough." "No, you know the version of me I let people see." He grinned. "I'd like to meet the rest." For the first time since losing my father, I believed someone wanted to know the real me. That belief would become the most expensive mistake of my life. For the first time since losing my father, I believed someone wanted to know the real me. That belief would become the most expensive mistake of my life. Richard and I married 14 months later. The wedding wasn't extravagant. I could have afforded a ballroom, a live orchestra, and a honeymoon in Europe. Instead, we chose a small ceremony overlooking the lake where my father used to take me fishing. Richard insisted simplicity was more meaningful. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if he truly believed that, or if he simply hadn't learned how much money I actually had. After the wedding, everyone assumed I would step away from Brooks Development and become a full-time wife. Instead, I was in my office the following Monday at 7 in the morning reviewing blueprints for a 30-home development. Richard kissed me before leaving. "I love how driven you are," he said. "I'd never ask you to change." I smiled. "I wouldn't anyway." He laughed. "I know. For years, that seemed to be enough. We worked. We traveled. We built a beautiful life. When our first daughter, Emily, was born, Richard cried before I did. He held her so carefully, as though she might disappear if he breathed too hard. Watching him become a father made me love him even more. 3 years later, our son, Daniel, arrived. Our home was loud, messy, filled with laughter. Every Sunday morning, Richard made pancakes while Emily danced around the kitchen and Daniel tried to steal chocolate chips from the bowl. Sometimes I would stand quietly in the doorway with a cup of coffee, just watching them, thinking, this is happiness. I had no idea happiness can slowly disappear without making a sound. It doesn't always leave in one dramatic moment. Sometimes, it slips away one forgotten anniversary, one canceled dinner, one unexplained business trip at a time. The first change was so small, I almost ignored it. Richard stopped asking about my day. For years, he'd call every afternoon. How did the meeting go? Did the Johnson contract finally get signed? What are we having for dinner? Those calls became shorter. Then they became texts. Eventually, they disappeared altogether. I told myself he was busy. Everyone gets busy, especially in their 50s. Then came the business trips. Chicago, Dallas, Seattle. Always 2 or 3 days. Always last minute. Always accompanied by just enough details to sound believable. I'll be back Thursday. The client's impossible. The flight got delayed. I believed every word. Because trust isn't something you question after 25 years of marriage. One evening, I waited nearly 3 hours for him. It was our 27th anniversary. I had reserved a table at the same Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date. The owner still remembered us. He had even placed fresh white roses on the table. 7 o'clock came, then 7:30. By 8, the restaurant had filled with couples celebrating birthdays, anniversaries, and proposals. The owner approached me quietly. Mrs. Brooks, would you like me to keep your dinner warm? I forced a smile. I'm sure he'll be here. At 8:47, my phone buzzed. Sorry. Meeting ran late. Rain check? Just 11 words. No apology. No phone call. No anniversary. I stared at the message until the screen went dark. The owner walked over carrying 2 slices of cheesecake. They're on the house, he said gently. I thanked him, then drove home alone. Richard arrived after midnight. He smelled unfamiliar. Not like perfume. Not exactly. Just different. Expensive cologne. A scent I had never bought for him. You still awake? He asked casually while loosening his tie. I waited. I told you the meeting ran late. You sent a text. What else was I supposed to do? I wanted to argue. Instead, I simply nodded. That was the first time I chose peace over truth. It wouldn't be the last. Over the next year, Richard became a man I barely recognized. He guarded his phone like it contained state secrets. If it buzzed while he was in the shower, he'd rush out with shampoo still in his hair. If I walked into the room while he was texting, the screen instantly went black. At dinner, he smiled at notifications more often than he smiled at me. One Saturday morning, Emily came over with our 2 grandchildren. While the kids played in the backyard, she leaned against the kitchen counter and watched her father through the window. Mom, has Dad been acting strange? My heart skipped. What do you mean? She hesitated. I don't know. He seems distracted. Every time I visit, he's either on his phone or leaving. I stirred my coffee slowly. Work. Emily looked unconvinced. You've always defended him. I know. But are you sure everything's okay? I wanted to tell her the truth. That I'd noticed it too. That sometimes I woke up at 3 in the morning and found Richard sitting alone on the patio texting someone in the dark. That he smiled at those messages, the way he used to smile at mine. Instead, I lied to my own daughter. We're fine. Emily reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. If you ever need me, I'm only a phone call away. I smiled. I know, sweetheart. After she left, I stood at the kitchen sink watching Richard laugh at something on his phone. He never noticed I was looking. And for the first time in 28 years, I felt like a guest inside my own marriage. Then, 3 weeks later, I found the receipt that changed everything. The receipt was folded twice. It had slipped out of Richard's jacket pocket while I was gathering laundry for the dry cleaner. I almost threw it away. Then one number caught my attention. $4,860. No business dinner cost nearly $5,000. Curious, I unfolded the paper. It was from an upscale jewelry boutique nearly 200 miles away. 1 diamond bracelet, custom engraving, gift packaging, paid in full. The date on the receipt was impossible to ignore. It was the same night Richard had missed our anniversary dinner. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was for a client. Maybe it was for Emily. Maybe. I stopped myself. The human mind is incredibly creative when it's trying to protect a broken heart. That evening, Richard walked into the kitchen carrying his briefcase. Everything, okay? He asked. I held up the receipt. His smile disappeared for less than a second. Then it returned. Oh, that! What is it? A retirement gift. For who? My regional manager. A diamond bracelet? He helped the company for 30 years. I looked directly into his eyes. And you paid nearly $5,000 for his retirement gift? Richard shrugged. The company reimbursed me. Can I see the reimbursement? His expression hardened. Eleanor, do you really think I'd lie to you over something this ridiculous? There it was. Not an answer. A question designed to make me feel guilty for asking. I quietly placed the receipt back on the counter. I'm sorry. He kissed my forehead. You're working too much. You imagine things. Then he picked up the receipt, tore it into tiny pieces, and dropped them into the trash. That should have ended my doubts. Instead, it confirmed them. For the first time in our marriage, I began paying attention. Really paying attention. I noticed he had started dressing differently. Designer shirts, new watches, haircuts every 2 weeks instead of every 2 months. He joined a gym despite claiming for years that he hated exercising. His phone was never more than an arm's length away, even while sleeping. One Friday night, around 11, he fell asleep on the couch watching television. His phone buzzed. Just once. Normally, I would have ignored it. That night, I didn't. The screen lit up before locking again. I caught only 6 words. I already miss you. No name, just a heart. My chest tightened. I picked up the phone. Locked. Face ID. Passcode. He had never used either before. Richard stirred slightly. I quickly placed the phone back exactly where it had been. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I drove to the office earlier than usual. Not because I had work. Because I needed to think. I sat alone inside my father's old office. His desk was exactly as I'd kept it after all these years. Solid oak. Worn leather chair. A photograph of the two of us standing in front of the company's first completed neighborhood. Whenever life became overwhelming, I came here. As I stared at his photograph, I heard his voice in my memory. If people underestimate you, don't stop them. They'll never see you coming. I looked around the office. Brooks Development had grown from 12 employees to more than 200 under my leadership. I negotiated contracts worth millions. I spotted fraud before auditors did. I made difficult decisions every single week. Yet somehow, inside my own home, I had convinced myself I couldn't handle the truth. I stood up, walked back to my desk, opened my laptop, and searched for one thing. Private investigator. 3 days later, a woman named Claire Morgan walked into my office. She wasn't what I expected. No trench coat, no sunglasses, just a navy blazer, a legal pad, and the calm confidence of someone who had seen every kind of betrayal imaginable. She sat across from me. What can I help you with, Mrs. Brooks? I took a deep breath. I think my husband is having an affair. Claire didn't react. She didn't gasp. She didn't offer sympathy. She simply asked, "What makes you believe that?" I told her everything. The business trips, the missed anniversary, the receipt, the secretive phone, the late-night messages. When I finished, she closed her notebook. Would you like the truth? Or would you like reassurance? I swallowed hard. The truth, she nodded. Good, because those are 2 very different services. For the first time in weeks, I felt strangely calm, because whatever happened next, I had finally stopped lying to myself. Claire Morgan wasn't interested in comforting me. She was interested in facts. Do you know the woman's name? She asked. I shook my head. No. Do you know where your husband claims to travel for work? Chicago, Dallas, Seattle, wherever his company sends him. Claire nodded as she wrote. People having affairs usually don't become careless overnight. They become confident, and confidence leaves patterns. She slid a business card across my desk. I'll need 1 week. No more. I looked at the card without touching it. What if I'm wrong? Claire leaned forward. Then you'll finally sleep again. And if I'm right, she paused, you'll finally stop wondering. The longest week of my life began. I didn't confront Richard. I didn't search his phone. I didn't follow him. Instead, I watched. Really watched. He hummed while shaving. He smiled at messages before breakfast. He started wearing a cologne I'd never seen before. One evening, he stood in front of the mirror trying on 3 different ties. I laughed softly. Big meeting tomorrow? He smiled without looking at me. You could say that. I smiled back. I hope it goes well. He kissed my cheek. You're the best wife a man could ask for. Those words hurt more than silence, because I knew he didn't mean them anymore. 7 days later, my office receptionist called. "Mrs. Brooks? Miss Morgan is here." Claire entered carrying a thin black folder, much thinner than I expected. She closed the office door behind her. "Before you open this," she said calmly, "I need to ask one question." I looked up. "Go ahead. If everything inside this folder confirms your worst fear, will you still stay with him?" I didn't answer, because I honestly didn't know. Claire placed the folder on my desk. "I followed your husband for 6 days. He never went to Chicago. He never had a business meeting. He never visited a client." She opened the folder. The first photograph nearly stopped my heart. Richard, holding another woman's hand. Not in another city. Less than 15 minutes from our house. Outside an expensive restaurant I had always wanted to visit. The timestamp showed 8:41 p.m., the exact night he had texted me saying his meeting was running late. I swallowed hard. Claire silently turned the page. Another photograph. They were laughing. Another. They were embracing. Another. He kissed her. Not a quick kiss. Not a mistake. The kind of kiss only people deeply involved share. My hands began trembling. Claire quietly placed a glass of water in front of me. I know. I couldn't speak. For 29 years, I had believed I knew the man I married. Yet the smiling stranger in those photographs felt like someone I'd never met. Then I saw the next picture. It wasn't the kiss that shocked me. It was the bracelet. The diamond bracelet. The one from the receipt. She was wearing it. Exactly the same engraving visible inside the clasp. So, I whispered, "The anniversary gift," Claire nodded, "was never for a regional manager." I closed my eyes. The room felt strangely quiet, not because there was no sound, because something inside me had finally broken. After several minutes, I opened my eyes again. "Who is she?" Claire turned another page. "Her name is Vanessa Carter, 32, former luxury real estate consultant, no children, never married. They've been seeing each other for approximately 11 months. 11 months. Almost a year. A year of lies. A year of pretending. A year of kissing me goodbye every morning before driving to another woman." Then Claire said something I wasn't prepared for. "Eleanor, the affair isn't the biggest problem." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She slid one final document across the desk. "I think your husband is planning something much bigger. I stared at the document in front of me. It wasn't a photograph. It wasn't a receipt. It was a copy of a corporate filing. Richard's signature covered the last page. "What is this?" I asked. Claire folded her hands. "For the last 4 months, your husband has been meeting with a corporate attorney." I looked back at the document. "He has been trying to create the impression that Brooks Development is a jointly controlled marital asset." I frowned. "But it isn't." "No. It was your father's company. You inherited it before you married. Legally, it's yours." I let out a slow breath. "So he can't take it." Claire hesitated. "Not directly. But he can force an expensive legal fight. He knows most people settle to avoid years in court." I leaned back in my chair. Richard wasn't just cheating. He was planning. Planning every step. Planning his exit. Planning my destruction. That evening, I drove home earlier than usual. Richard wasn't there. For the first time, I didn't wait for him. Instead, I walked through every room of our house. The living room. The kitchen. The upstairs hallway, where pencil marks still measured Emily and Daniel's height as children. The porch swing Richard built during our 5th year of marriage. Or rather, the porch swing he always claimed he built. The truth was, I had hired the carpenter. Richard had simply stained the wood one afternoon. Funny how memory changes when love disappears. Every room reminded me of something I'd paid for. Every improvement. Every renovation. Every mortgage payment after Richard's business failed. Twice. I never held it over his head. Marriage wasn't supposed to keep score. Apparently, Richard had been keeping score all along. At exactly 8:15 p.m., his headlights pulled into the driveway. He walked inside, smiling. "Hey, you ate already?" I wasn't hungry. He loosened his tie. "Long day." I know the feeling. He poured himself a glass of whiskey. "You okay?" I nodded. "Just tired." He studied my face. For one terrifying second, I thought he knew. Instead, he smiled. "You should take a vacation. You work too hard." I almost laughed. The man secretly planning to steal my future was advising me to relax. The following morning, Claire called. "I need you downtown. Now." 20 minutes later, I met her inside a quiet coffee shop. She slid into the booth across from me. I found something. She handed me another envelope. Inside were photographs. Not of Richard. Of Vanessa. Luxury handbags. Designer shoes. Spa vacations. Weekend trips. Jewelry. Every single purchase had one thing in common. Richard paid for it. My stomach tightened. How much? Claire answered without looking at her notes. In 11 months. Approximately $482,000. I blinked. What? She nodded. Private jets, luxury hotels, vehicle lease, credit cards, cash transfers, almost $500,000. I couldn't breathe. Richard had always insisted we watch our spending. He complained whenever I donated large amounts to local charities. He once argued with me for 20 minutes because I bought Emily a piano she wanted for her children. Yet behind my back, he had spent nearly $500,000 on another woman, using accounts I had helped build. Claire wasn't finished. There's more. She placed a single bank statement in front of me. This account was opened 6 months ago. I looked at the balance. My heart stopped. Richard had quietly transferred more than $1.8 million into a separate investment account. Small amounts, week after week. Always just enough to avoid attracting attention. He had been preparing for this for months. Maybe years. I whispered. He planned to leave me. Claire met my eyes. I don't think he planned to leave. I think he planned to leave after taking everything he thought he could. Silence settled between us. Outside the cafe, people hurried along the sidewalk, carrying shopping bags and coffee cups. Their lives continued as though nothing had happened. Mine had just split into 2 parts, the woman I had been and the woman I was about to become. I folded every document carefully and placed them back into the envelope. Then I looked at Claire. No more crying, she nodded. No more crying. I'm done being the woman who waits. A faint smile appeared on Claire's face. So, what do you want to do? I looked out the cafe window. For almost 30 years, I had been protecting Richard from the consequences of his own decisions. I had paid his debts, defended his reputation, covered his mistakes, saved his pride. Not anymore. This time, I was going to let him believe he had won, because overconfidence was about to become his biggest mistake, and I had just begun writing the ending of our story. Claire smiled for the first time since we'd met. It wasn't a smile of satisfaction. It was the smile of someone who knew a battle had finally begun. Good, she said, because if you're serious, you have one advantage. I folded the envelope. What's that? Richard thinks you still trust him. The next morning I met with my attorney. Michael Harris had represented my family for nearly 30 years. He had helped my father write his will. He handled Brooks Development's largest acquisitions. More importantly, he knew exactly how my father thought. When I walked into his office carrying Claire's folder, he took one look at my face and quietly closed the blinds. Eleanor, what happened? I placed the photographs on his desk, one by one. He said nothing. He simply looked through every picture, every bank statement, every document, every transfer. When he reached the last page, he removed his glasses. I've known Richard almost 30 years. So have I, Michael sighed. I never thought. Neither did I. Silence filled the office. Finally, he spoke. Legally, you're in a stronger position than he realizes. I leaned forward. Tell me everything. For nearly 2 hours, Michael explained every possible scenario. Richard couldn't claim ownership of Brooks Development. The company had been inherited years before my marriage. Its legal ownership had never changed. The house was another story. Or so Richard believed. Michael smiled slightly. Do you remember what your father insisted on before construction even began? I frowned. The land deed? He nodded. The land has always remained exclusively in your name. The structure sits on land that belongs only to you. I stared at him. So, if Richard files for divorce, Michael finished my sentence. He'll discover something he never bothered to check. He owns far less than he thinks. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, because I finally stopped feeling helpless. Over the following month, I became an actress. The best actress of my life. I laughed at Richard's jokes. I wished him safe travels. I kissed him goodbye every morning. I asked about meetings I already knew didn't exist. Every lie he told, I accepted with a smile. Claire continued following him. Each report became worse. Vanessa wasn't simply his mistress. She had already started introducing herself as his future wife. Claire even obtained photographs of them touring expensive homes together. Richard pointed at kitchens. Vanessa chose furniture. They laughed like newlyweds. The irony almost made me smile. They were decorating a future, paid for with money that legally wasn't his. One Friday evening, Richard surprised me. "We should have dinner tomorrow." I looked up from my book. "Really?" He smiled warmly. "It's been a while." For one brief second, I saw the man I married. Or perhaps, the man I imagined I'd married. I'd like that. The next evening, we drove to a beautiful steakhouse overlooking the river. He ordered my favorite wine without asking. He complimented my dress. He held my hand across the table. If someone had seen us, they would have believed we were deeply in love. Halfway through dinner, he cleared his throat. "Eleanor, I've been thinking. I already knew what was coming. I think we've grown apart." There it was, the rehearsed speech. "I'll always care about you. But maybe we'd both be happier if we had some space." I gently placed my fork down. "You want a divorce?" He lowered his eyes. I didn't want to say it that way. But yes, I looked at him for several long seconds. Inside, my heart cracked. Outside, I remained perfectly calm. "If that's what you want, I won't stop you." He looked genuinely surprised. "I thought you'd argue." "No. I've spent too many years forcing people to stay. If someone wants to leave, I'll open the door." For a split second, guilt crossed his face. Then it disappeared. "I'm glad we're handling this like adults." Adults. Such an interesting word. Adults don't secretly steal from their spouses. Adults don't spend family savings on mistresses. Adults don't rehearse lies for nearly a year. But I simply nodded. "When would you like to move forward?" Richard smiled with obvious relief. "Soon. Very soon." The following Tuesday, Claire called me just after lunch. "Eleanor, he's buying a ring." I closed my office door. "Are you certain?" I watched him. He just left Carter Jewelers. He purchased an engagement ring. I slowly sat down. He hasn't even filed for divorce. "I know. And there's something else." "What?" Claire's voice became quieter. "I think they're planning to move into your house." I felt the air leave my lungs. "My house?" I overheard Vanessa. She told the sales consultant, "I can't wait until that old woman is finally gone." For the first time since discovering the affair, I cried. Not because Richard loved someone else. That pain had already settled. I cried because another woman, a complete stranger, was already planning where to place her furniture inside the home where I had raised my children. She laughed, before I had even left. That night, I walked through every room of the house, running my fingers across the walls, the staircase, the kitchen island I'd personally designed, the family photographs. Every corner whispered memories. Emily's first steps, Daniel learning to ride his bicycle in the driveway, Christmas mornings, birthday candles, Sunday breakfasts. I wasn't mourning a building. I was mourning the life I thought had existed inside it. Then, I stopped in front of the large framed family portrait hanging above the fireplace. Richard stood beside me, one arm around my shoulders. Emily and Daniel smiling in front of us. A perfect family. Or at least, a perfect photograph. I quietly removed the frame from the wall, carried it upstairs, and placed it inside a storage box. Because deep inside, I knew, very soon, that wall would never look the same again. 3 days later, Richard asked me to have lunch with him. Not dinner, not coffee, lunch. It was unusual. He rarely interrupted his workday unless something important was about to happen. We met at a quiet restaurant downtown. He looked unusually relaxed, almost happy. "You look good," he said. "So do you." The waiter poured water before either of us spoke again. Richard folded his hands. "I've been thinking about everything. I know. I don't want this divorce to become ugly." Neither did I, but one of us had already made sure it would. "I appreciate that," I replied. He smiled. "I knew you would." Then he reached into his briefcase and placed a neatly organized folder on the table. I had my attorney prepare a simple property agreement. There it was. Already prepared. Already printed. Already signed. By him. He had planned this for months. He pushed the folder toward me. "I think this is fair." I opened it slowly. My eyes scanned the pages. He wanted the lake house. He wanted the vacation condo in Aspen. He wanted 2 investment accounts. He wanted 1/3 of Brooks' development. And he wanted me to move out of our home within 30 days. I actually laughed. Richard looked confused. "What's funny?" I closed the folder. "You've certainly been busy. I just want us both to move on. Is that what this is? Moving on?" He nodded confidently. "Yes." I looked directly into his eyes. Richard, I'll have my attorney review it. His smile faded ever so slightly. I was hoping you'd sign today. I never sign million-dollar documents without legal advice. He forced another smile. Of course. I understand. No, he didn't. Because if he had understood me at all, he never would have placed that folder in front of me. That evening, Michael called. I've reviewed everything. And? He knows the house deed hasn't changed. I frowned. What? He deliberately avoided mentioning land ownership. So he doesn't know? Michael chuckled softly. Oh, he knows enough to be dangerous, but not enough to win. I leaned back in my chair. What do? We wait. He's getting impatient. The more impatient he becomes, the more mistakes he'll make. Mistakes. Michael was right. Because less than a week later, Richard made the biggest mistake of his life. It happened on a bright Saturday afternoon. Emily had taken the grandchildren to the zoo. Daniel was visiting friends out of state. The house was unusually quiet. I was sitting on the back patio with a cup of tea when I heard a car pull into the driveway. Not Richard's sedan. A white luxury SUV. Then, another car behind it. I stood. 2 doors opened. Richard stepped out of the driver's side. Vanessa climbed out beside him. She wore oversized sunglasses and carried 3 expensive shopping bags. She looked around the property, like she already owned it. I calmly walked toward the front door. Richard unlocked it using his key. He didn't knock. He didn't call first. He simply walked inside. Vanessa followed. So this is it, she said excitedly. I love the ceilings. She walked into my living room, ran her fingers across the marble fireplace, turned slowly beneath the chandelier. I'll replace those curtains. And the sofa. The dining table has to go. She was redesigning my home, while I stood 10 feet away. Richard finally looked at me. Eleanor, we need to talk. I figured. He placed his keys on the entry table. I've signed a lease on an apartment. For you, I blinked. For me? It's fully furnished. You can move this weekend. Vanessa smiled politely. It'll be easier for everyone. Everyone. Interesting choice of words. Richard took a slow breath. I don't want unnecessary conflict. I think it's best if you pack today. He actually believed I would. Then, Vanessa walked into the kitchen. She opened cabinets, looked inside drawers. She even opened my refrigerator. Oh, she laughed. We'll definitely need to remodel. Richard laughed with her. That sound hurt more than any insult. Because once upon a time, he laughed like that with me. Vanessa returned carrying one of my crystal wine glasses. She examined it against the light. She frowned dramatically. There are fingerprints. Then she held it toward me. Would you mind washing this? I don't like drinking from dirty glasses. Richard said nothing. Not a single word. He simply watched, waiting to see what I would do. I slowly accepted the glass, turned it once in my hands, then carefully placed it back on the kitchen island. I don't think so. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. I'm sorry? I said, I don't think so. She looked toward Richard. Did she just refuse? He sighed. Eleanor, please don't make this difficult. Difficult? I smiled for the first time all afternoon. No, you've misunderstood something, Richard frowned. What? I reached into the pocket of my cardigan, removed my phone, and pressed one button. Michael, they're here. I think it's time. I ended the call. Richard folded his arms. What was that supposed to mean? Before I could answer, another vehicle entered the driveway. Then another. And another. Vanessa walked toward the window. Richard, I think someone's coming. 3 black vehicles stopped in front of the house. One belonged to Michael. One belonged to Claire. The third made Richard's face lose every bit of color. Because it wasn't a moving company. It wasn't a realtor. It was the sheriff's office. Richard whispered, What have you done? I looked at him with complete calm. No, Richard. The better question is, what have you done? Richard's face turned pale. Not the kind of pale that comes from surprise. The kind that comes from realizing every carefully built lie is about to collapse. Vanessa looked from the window to Richard. Why are the police here? Richard forced a laugh. They're probably at the wrong house. But even he didn't believe his own words. The front door opened. Sheriff David Collins stepped inside with 2 deputies. I had known David for years. Not socially. Professionally. Brooks Development had donated materials after a flood destroyed several homes in the county. He tipped his hat politely. Mrs. Brooks. Good afternoon, Sheriff. Richard stepped forward. What's going on? Before the sheriff could answer, Michael Harris entered carrying a leather briefcase. Claire followed behind him. Vanessa looked completely confused. Richard looked terrified. Michael calmly placed his briefcase on the dining table. "Eleanor, everything is ready," I nodded. "Thank you." Richard finally lost his patience. "Would somebody tell me what's happening?" Michael slowly removed several folders. "I'd be happy to." He looked directly at Richard. "You recently presented my client with divorce papers." Richard swallowed. "Yes. You also demanded ownership of Brooks Development, the Aspen condominium, the lake house, and this property." "So?" Michael smiled. "I admire confidence, but confidence without research is usually expensive." Richard frowned. "What are you talking about?" Michael opened the first folder. The deed. He slid the original property deed across the table. Richard glanced at it, then looked away. "I've already seen it." "No. You've seen copies. You've never actually read it." Richard picked it up again. His eyes moved across the first page, then the second. Then suddenly, he stopped breathing. "No," he whispered. Michael nodded calmly. "Yes, the land beneath this house has always belonged exclusively to Eleanor Brooks. The residence was constructed on inherited property that never became marital property. Legally." Michael paused. "You do not own this home." Vanessa stared at Richard. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. "Because he couldn't," Michael continued. "You've spent nearly a year making plans for a property that isn't yours." Richard looked at me. "You knew?" "I know many things. You let me believe. I let you believe exactly what you wanted to believe." Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Then Claire quietly placed another folder on the table. "This contains photographs documenting your extramarital relationship." Another folder. "Financial transfers totaling $1,823,000. Another. "Luxury purchases made using marital investment accounts." Another. "Statements made by Miss Carter regarding her intention to occupy this property before any divorce proceedings." Vanessa's mouth slowly opened. "You had someone following us?" Claire answered calmly. "You made that surprisingly easy." Vanessa turned toward Richard. "You told me everything belonged to you." Richard remained silent. "You told me the divorce was already finalized." Still silent. "You told me she had agreed to leave." Nothing. For the first time, Vanessa wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the man she'd trusted, the same way I once had. Sheriff Collins finally stepped forward. "Mr. Brooks, I've been asked to remain present while legal possession of the property is confirmed." Richard looked offended. "You think I'm dangerous?" The sheriff shrugged. "I think emotions make good people do foolish things." Michael closed another folder. "We're also filing an emergency injunction preventing the sale or transfer of any disputed financial assets until forensic accountants complete their review." Richard's eyes widened. "You froze my accounts?" "No," Michael corrected him. "Your accounts. The ones funded with money that doesn't legally belong to you." Vanessa stepped backward. "What?" Richard finally exploded. "This is ridiculous! I built this life!" I quietly looked at him. "No, you decorated it. I built it." His face turned red. "I worked for everything." I shook my head. "When your first company failed, I paid every creditor. When the bank refused your second business loan, I guaranteed it. When you lost $400,000 investing in that restaurant chain, I covered the losses. When you mortgaged your future, I protected it." I took one slow step toward him. "And while I was protecting your future, you were financing someone else's." Richard opened his mouth, but no words came, because for the first time in 29 years, there was nothing left to manipulate. Nothing left to deny. Nothing left to hide. Vanessa slowly removed the diamond bracelet from her wrist, the one Richard bought on our anniversary. She looked at it for several seconds, then placed it gently on the kitchen island. "I don't want it." Richard reached for her arm. "Vanessa!" She pulled away. "No, you lied to me too. You said she was controlling. You said she never appreciated you. You said this house was yours." Tears filled her eyes. "I left my apartment because of you." Richard stepped closer. "I can explain." She laughed through her tears. "No, I finally understand. I wasn't your future. I was just your next lie." Without another word, she picked up her handbag, walked to the front door, and left. The sound of her heels disappeared down the stone pathway. A car door slammed. Seconds later, the white SUV drove away. Richard didn't follow her. He couldn't. Because in less than 10 minutes, he had lost his mistress, his dream, his lies, and the illusion that he controlled the ending of our story. He simply stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by the life he'd tried to steal. And for the first time since I'd met him, he looked completely alone. Richard didn't say another word. Sheriff Collins looked at him for a moment before speaking in a calm voice. "Mr. Brooks, I'm going to ask you to gather your personal belongings." Richard blinked. "What?" "The property owner has requested that you leave the premises." He turned to me. "Eleanor, you can't be serious." I looked at him quietly. "For almost a year, I begged myself to believe you were still the man I married. You made sure I was wrong." He stepped closer. "I made mistakes. We can fix this." I smiled sadly. "No, you made choices, and choices have consequences." He lowered his voice. "Please, not like this." I looked around the living room, the same room where we'd celebrated birthdays, where our children had opened Christmas presents, where we'd promised each other forever. It was never supposed to be like this. You decided that, not me. Richard slowly walked upstairs. No one followed him. For nearly 20 minutes, the house remained silent. Eventually, he returned carrying 2 suitcases. The expensive leather luggage I'd bought him for our 25th anniversary. He stopped in front of me. "I never stopped loving you." I looked into his eyes. For years, those words would have healed every wound. Now, they meant nothing. "You stopped loving me long before you admitted it. You just forgot to tell me." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say. Sheriff Collins opened the front door. Richard walked outside. Halfway down the driveway, he turned around. He looked at the house, then at me. I didn't wave. I didn't cry. I simply closed the front door. For the first time in nearly 30 years, the silence inside my home felt peaceful. The divorce lasted 8 months. Richard fought harder than Michael expected. Not because he believed he would win, because he couldn't accept losing. Every accusation his attorney made, Michael answered with documents. Every lie was answered with evidence. The private investigators' reports, the bank transfers, the photographs, the financial records, the hidden accounts. Every attempt to paint me as the villain collapsed under facts. By the final hearing, even the judge looked exhausted. She adjusted her glasses before reading her decision. Based upon the evidence presented, Brooks Development remains the separate inherited property of Eleanor Brooks. The marital residence remains solely under her ownership. The respondent is ordered to reimburse all documented marital funds improperly transferred for non-marital purposes. Richard lowered his head. The judge continued. Furthermore, given the intentional concealment of assets, the court awards attorney fees to Mrs. Brooks. The courtroom became silent. Richard had lost. Completely. A week later, Emily and Daniel came to the house together. Neither of them had spoken much during the divorce. Not because they didn't care, because they were trying to process the impossible. Emily hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "I kept believing Dad." I kissed her forehead. "You wanted your family to stay together. So did I." Daniel stood quietly near the fireplace. I confronted him. I looked up. "What happened?" "He said you turned everyone against him." I smiled softly. "I didn't. He did that himself." Daniel nodded. "I know." Then he walked over and hugged me. It was the first time he'd hugged me since he was a teenager. I should have seen it sooner. "No, you should have had a father worth believing." His eyes filled with tears. Mine did too. Months passed. Winter became spring. Spring became summer. For the first time in decades, I stopped living for someone else's happiness. I renovated the kitchen. Not because Vanessa wanted to, because I did. I planted white roses beside the porch, exactly where my father once said they would grow best. Brooks Development expanded into 2 neighboring counties. Emily joined the board of directors. Daniel started managing community development projects. The company remained exactly what my father had hoped it would become, a family legacy. Not because of blood, because of integrity. One crisp autumn afternoon, I received an unexpected letter. The return address surprised me. Richard. I considered throwing it away. Instead, I opened it. Inside was a single handwritten page. "Eleanor, every day I think about the life I destroyed. I blamed everyone except myself. I thought money would make me happy. I thought younger meant better. I thought starting over would erase what I'd done. I was wrong. Vanessa left months ago. Most of the people I called friends disappeared. I've spent more nights alone than I can count. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope one day you'll remember me for who I used to be, instead of who I became. Richard." I folded the letter carefully, walked outside. and sat on the porch overlooking the lake. The sun reflected across the water, just as it had the day my father taught me how to skip stones. I read the letter one more time, then placed it inside a small wooden box with old photographs, not because I wanted to remember the pain, but because I never wanted to forget the lesson. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reopening a door. Sometimes, it simply means putting down the weight you've carried for too long. I looked at the house. My house. The place where I had once believed my life was ending. Instead, it had quietly become the place where it began again. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Never let someone convince you that your kindness is weakness. Kind people often stay silent longer than they should. But when they finally stand up, they do so with a strength no one saw coming. And sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't watching someone lose everything. It's realizing you never needed them to win in the first place.